Yes, lads, what is going on? And welcome to Season 4, Episode 15 of The Running Irishman. In this episode, we are joined by Robbie Cassidy, aka the Mobility Tutor, over on Instagram. Robbie is a physiotherapist, sport therapist. Basically, his aim and his goal is to get people back to full health and full fitness in whatever sport they do. So his whole philosophy basically is kind of becoming healthy through movement and becoming pain free through movement, and that's what we get into in this episode. Right beside me here I have a full monitor worth of notes, but Robbie and I, after about 50 minutes, only got through 1 point, which is a good sign. It was a deadly conversation. We dive deep into kind of the mental side of injuries as well as the physical side. We also get into how your mood and your emotions play into your injuries in many different ways, and also we dive big into Achilles tendonopathy, something that I've been struggling with for the past year and a half now that I'm just about overcoming. But it's a really great episode. Robbie gives me lots and lots of tips and advice and helpful information that I'm sure is going to help a lot of you all out there as well, and whatever your injuries you're going through. And Robbie and I have already planned an episode 2 for this podcast. As I mentioned, there are so many notes left and so many topics of conversation that I want to chat with Robbie about. So keep an eye out for episode 2 of the podcast with Robbie. I'm really looking forward to it. It's a really informative episode of the podcast. I think further down the line I need to get more kind of physiotherapists, kind of the medical and health and science and base point sports and athletics and running. So that is definitely something I'm going to look into further down the line with the podcast. But yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation that I had with Robbie, because that's what it was. It wasn't an interview. We kind of went off, and some of the questions I asked are a bit selfish towards my own injuries, but I'm sure they will help you guys out as well. So I'm really looking forward for you all to give it a listen, and I hope you all enjoy this episode of the podcast with Robbie Cassidy. Alright lads, so we are here with Robbie Cassidy, aka the Mobility Tutor, over on Instagram. Robbie, thanks very much for taking the time to come onto the podcast. The first physiotherapist, sports therapist that we've had on, and no better man to kind of kick that realm of things off on the podcast. So I'm really looking forward to this chat. As I said before we jumped on, it's a little bit selfish, some of the topics and points that we're going to be touching on, but they're also broad enough to where people that have experienced these kind of injuries and these things within sports, that they can benefit a lot as well from this episode. So do you want to kind of just take it away for the listeners at home, who you are and what you're all about?
Perfect. Yeah, Killian, thanks a million for having me on. I know it's been in the pipeline for a while, so it's good to actually finally get it going. I suppose to start off, my undergrad it was in athletic rehabilitation therapy. Now I went on and did my master's after, but I've been running the Mobility Tutor for the last 6 years online. So I guess the easiest way to describe it is I work with active people with recurring injuries. So as we chatted before, things like Achilles tendinopathies, hamstring tendinopathies, it could be back injuries or shoulder injuries, and knee injuries, whatever it is. But it's things that just keep coming back repeatedly, and they're finding it tough to get over it. So they could have been through 1 or 2 different courses of physiotherapy. Some people may have gotten surgeries, and they just find that it wasn't 100% for them. So I suppose that's the basis of the people that I work with at the moment. In terms of sports and stuff like that, my background is in boxing and then Gaelic football, rugby, but boxing was probably my main one, and at the moment now it'd be more to do with football and jiu-jitsu, stuff like that. But hopefully that's a good enough intro for you, and people have a better idea of what I do anyway.
No, definitely. And as the episode goes on, we'll get like an even further basis of your knowledge throughout sports, obviously, because I'm sure that you deal with many different kinds of athletes and kinds of injuries. So no, that was deadly. And as you mentioned there, we just do a little bit of a background about yourself, like we said. So kind of growing up, you mentioned boxing was your main sport. So was injury something that kind of was a part in your, sport and career growing up that kind of led you into wanting to be able to help others throughout their kind of fitness journeys?
That's a good question, actually. So I suppose what brought me into it initially was that a lot of my family are involved in some type of medicine. Like my sister's a nurse, my other sister is a doctor, is a trainee doctor. My brother is a medical engineer, and stuff like that are all involved in it with through whether it's I'm just trying to think now. Like nurses, there's other ones involved in. Oh, it's after going out of my head now. With the needles, acupuncture, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it was always from the background. It was always kind of something that I was interested in, and then obviously being involved in sports, you're picking up injuries, and I think when you're highly involved in sports as well, when you're training a lot, as I'm sure you know, people kind of come up to you and ask you questions about how would you have dealt with this, or how would you go about dealing with this type of injury, and I think it was from that background, and then I guess being in sports all the time, that it was something that I wanted to continue on with. So I was in probably it was late enough before I decided I was going to go into the therapy side of things. I didn't really know where I was going to go. I kind of wanted to go sports science or even psychology, were the two other ones, and physio then was kind of the one that would really stuck out to me, because I think I wanted to be involved in a one-to-one with people that I could get to know them, and then obviously help them in a physical way. Not just a psychological way, because obviously that side of it as
Yeah.
well, but the physical way was a huge thing. So I guess it was, yeah, from being involved in sports so much, and picking up little niggles and little injuries along the way, that really made me kind of think I want to dive into this a small bit more.
Definitely, and like you mentioned there, the mental side of injuries is something that isn't as touched on, obviously, as the physical side of it, just because that's the main focus. But is that something that you delve into with your clients about the mental side? Because I know myself, I've been out injured for a year and a half, and it is something that is. It's a really, really big side of it that maybe before you get injured, it's something you don't really think about, but kind of the emotional roller coaster you go throughout an injury, wanting to quit 1 minute, then things getting better 1 second, and then it all falls apart. So is that something that you touch on with a few of your clients?
100%, yeah, and I think that's definitely missed by a lot of people, is that there's that transition from like the identity of being a sports person and being training all the time, and then when you're on the sideline looking in, and you feel like sometimes even if you're at training, I know you're involved in running yourself. If you're at training and you're seeing everyone else competing and everyone else getting through sessions, and you're kind of only doing small bits on the side, you feel a bit isolated,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
you feel like you're not giving enough, and you feel, I think in a lot of ways as well, when you're really involved in sport, what happens to people is that they feel like they're not living up to who they are, but then they feel like other people look down on them
Yeah.
when they're injured, which is a big one. So it's something that I always address, is that that psychological side of how we can start to build back up and get back into it. But then there's the other side of it, and it's an interesting one, one that a lot of people might not know about as much. But that psychological side can actually play into the injury itself a lot. So it can play into how your nervous system reacts to an injury. It can play into the pain levels, your tightness levels, and how you're thinking about your body really, really has effect on it. So that's a side I think that I probably dive into more with them, as opposed to, because a lot of them they're out of sport. We try to keep them involved in whatever games they can, and especially when it's like a field or a team sport where you're maybe jumping in small sided games. When it's more of an individual sport, it's more just getting around the group that you usually train with and trying to get back in and doing what you can. But the psychological side of having let's say a fear of re-injury, or an avoidance behavior, or a compensatory behavior, that's something that you need to dive into a small bit more, because if you don't take care of that, what will happen is that you'll continue to get these recurring injuries, because your nervous system, in the easiest way to describe it, gets very hyperactive. So it starts to kick up with pain, it starts to give you a lot of tightness. You might notice that, okay, I was actually feeling really good here, and then you say, okay, right, I'll get out for like a 5k. You start running, and then at the 3k mark, if you're coming, an easy example would be if you had injured yourself at a certain part of a road or a track, and you start to come up on that again, your body starts to relive that memory, and things can start to kick up again. So there is two sides to it. So there's the emotional transition from sport, but there's the other side of it that you need to kind of make sure that you don't have any fear avoidance behaviors, or compensatory behaviors to try avoid getting that injury again, because that's a huge side to it, and it really plays into it a lot.
Yeah, no, there's some really, really good points there. And one that you did touch on was the fact that emotions, kind of can enhance pain, or are a really big factor in why people might feel, more pain at different points, whether it's throughout the day or how their emotions change. And it is something that I saw that you had up on your Instagram recently, and it is something that I wanted to dive into a little bit more. So it's not basically until you mentioned it is when I kind of think back on and times with the injury, and you're like, you know what, this is true. Because with me specifically, I initially had knee pains on the inside about my knees, and that was at its most painful early in the mornings, training in a specific spot, compared to if it was during the day, just running down the road. So I just kind of would a bit, obviously maybe a bit more information in terms of how that link is made between your mental side, it being in a specific situation or a specific emotion, how that is linked to the amount of pain that you do feel.
Yeah, so I guess it's a complex enough one, especially if it's anyone that's listened to it, it's the first time you've heard it. But basically, the way your pain system works is your pain, and it's a funny one to say, but when you go into and you kind of dig into it, it makes more sense. But your pain is dictated by your brain, and the analogy that I always use is if you throw a piece of Lego down on the ground, okay, and if you step on that Lego at nighttime when you're going to the bathroom, think about the pain at that level, the pain levels that you get with that. It's like a 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. It's you may as well have stepped on a sharp piece of glass or a nail.
Yeah.
It's a really, really high pain. You're getting really, really high pain levels. Now, if you put a piece of Lego on the ground in front of you and then you walk over it, you won't get the same level of pain. You might get a 1 or a 2.
Yeah.
And what's happening there is your body is perceiving it as a higher threat. So when it's a higher threat, what happens is that it just fires off all these pain signals to get you out of that situation as quick as possible so it can reassess and see if there actually is a threat there or not. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's one side to it. So once you get an understanding that pain is dictated by the brain, then you have to look at what else can contribute to that and what else can affect it. And obviously, as you just said there, emotions and mood are a huge one. Like if you're feeling down, you're out and you're kind of fatigued and tired and all that, what happens is your body goes into this nearly like survival state is it for lack of a better term, and it basically then starts to fire off signals way earlier. So your nervous system gets really, really, really responsive to any type of stimuli. So that could be, as you just said there, it could be running, it could be a certain part of the track, it could be a certain part of the day. If you're not a morning person and you try to go out for a morning run, you're going to most likely have higher pain levels in the morning than you would if the day was going on and you kind of got everything that you needed to get done and it was more of an enjoyable run in the evening.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's that side of it as well. Mood has a huge effect on it. And I suppose to put it in kind of like an easier context, if you think of anything, all right, that's going to take energy from your body, anything that's going to add stress or take energy from your body, because if you think about it, stress is your reaction to certain stimuli. So like if you're running, obviously your muscles are getting worked, your respiratory system is getting worked, your cardiovascular system is getting worked, and they take a bit of a dip after it, but then they start to adapt and they start to recover. Okay, yeah. But if you're always taking a dip, so if you're running and then you're going home and you're sleeping poorly and you're not drinking enough water, your diet is really poor, what's happening is you're always getting in a dip, but you're never getting into that recovery phase and the adaptation phase. So you're always dipping down. And as you go down, your body's threat level starts to go up. Okay?
Yeah.
And as the threat level starts to go up, the pain starts to increase, tightness starts to increase, fear, anxiety around the area starts to increase. And what will happen is you'll just start getting these pains that will feel like I did nothing different here. Like that's what I often get with runners is they'll say, and ultra runners especially, I work with a lot of ultra runners, it'll say, I changed nothing in my lifestyle. I'm still on the same running plan. I've been progressing over time. I've had I'm following a very strict progression. I'll pull back. I'll take my rest weeks when needed, but they won't assess everything else that's going on in their life. And for yourself in your situation, because I know you were saying you just did your leaving cert, around the time of your leaving cert, when things were a bit more stressful, that would be a great time to look at it and see what your pain levels were like, because you could get a better understanding. Okay, there's other aspects of my life affecting what's going on right now. Okay, and it's for other people that may be listening to it. It could be work. It could be they have a presentation due at work. It could be they're fighting with somebody at work. Now, all these things will really, those emotions will really heighten the pain that you feel, strictly because your nervous system is turned up. It's just way more reactive to everything that it sees. The same as what I said with the Lego. The way it touches it, you step on a piece of Lego. When you see it, it's not that much of a problem. When you don't see it, it just perceives it as a really, really high threat. And I guess with emotions, to finish it off, the exact same thing. If there's things going on in the background, it just perceives every threat as that bit higher. If there's like conflict in the background, if you have stressful things that are going on, if you're really busy, if you're sleeping poorly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. And kind of just to, add on to that a little bit. So, like, just say I was walking down the road to catch a bus and a bus ran past me and I ran down the road, I wouldn't feel any pain at the moment. Like for me specifically, the way my injury is, I wouldn't feel any pain whatsoever run after the bus. But with the way that I've been interacting with my physio, things that he's been telling me is that when I go out for runs now, getting back into running, I'm kind of looking for pain.
Yeah.
To kind of make sure that there, to reassure myself basically that there isn't any pain. But in doing so, once there is pain, it's probably then enhanced a little bit more because I'm constantly looking for it, compared to when I'm running for a bus, my main objective is to catch the bus. So would that kind of be in line in a similar sense?
Yeah, that's great insight. That's very good insight in that, yeah, when you are going out and you're looking for it, you're hyper aware. You're really aware of how your body's feeling, how your Achilles is feeling, or how your legs are feeling, as well as what your energy levels are like. So like you're very aware of what's going on in your body at the time,
Yeah.
and because of that, then your nervous system is a bit more ramped up. But if you're running for a bus, all you're thinking about is I need to get this bus to get where I need to be. So your body doesn't perceive that. Now you might get a small bit of pain after that,
Yeah.
but in general, like what they say a lot of the time is the adrenaline response, where the pain just gets stamped down while you go for something really quickly. Yeah, so that it does make a lot of sense that if you're out and you're looking for pain a lot, and that's something that I do find a lot with clients, is that especially in endurance sports, because in other sports that may be more like explosive, so even like 100 meters, stuff like that, like sprints, let's say, or in boxing, or in jiu-jitsu, or in something like a GAA, they might not be as aware of it at the time they're going for the ball
Yeah.
while they're making a 5 or 10 meter sprint. But with endurance sports, it's very repetitive in what you're doing, so you have a small bit more time to think about it as you're going through it. So like what you'll find a lot of the time is that at the start of the run, it'll go away, or you'll warm up, it'll go away. As you get into the run, then you'll start feeling better, and then as you start to become more aware of it, you start to think, Jesus, how is my Achilles doing? Then it starts to ramp
Yeah,
up a small bit
exactly.
more because you're more aware of it.
That is pretty much exactly what happens to me. Like before I go out running, I'm thinking about what I'm doing. My mobility work to try and reduce the pain. Once I go out and the run is going well, just I'm with the lads on the team and we're having a chat or whatever. I'm not thinking about it at all. The pain is at a zero. But then kind of once I stop running or we come to a traffic light and I'm like basically checking in, I suppose, on how the injury is feeling. Maybe then once I start running again, the pain might come back a little bit more just because I start thinking about it again, basically.
Yeah, but there is two sides to that, because what you're dealing with there is an inflammatory condition. Is that when you warm up in general in the early stages of an Achilles tendinopathy, the pain will go away naturally anyway. And when you stop, it should go away. Or when you stop, you'll start to feel it a small bit more. So you're actually battling with two sides there,
True,
in
actually,
that
yeah.
you're thinking about it, but it is an inflammatory condition as well. So when you do stop, a lot of the time what people get with Achilles pain, and I know myself because I've struggled with it in the past, is that the next morning when you wake up, that can be very bad.
De-
You can feel it the most the next morning.
Definitely. And no, Achilles is something that I do want to dive in with you. But just before we do that, one last thing on the kind of mental point is like you were mentioning there, if someone is coming up to a point on the run or on the track where they got their injury and maybe their nervous system is enhanced, what's one way maybe off the track or off the road that, or even either or, and that someone can get over that mental barrier and kind of move past their injury in both a physical and a mental state?
Yeah, excellent question. So there's a lot of different tactics or strategies that you can employ for these type of issues. Now, it really depends on how long the injury is going on. What happened at the time of the injury? Did you injure yourself, not you specifically now, but you'd be asking the client, did you injure yourself on a training run, or did you injure yourself in the All Ireland?
Yeah.
There's a big difference there, in front of a lot of people when you were trying to, let's say your family were there watching you as well. So there's that barrier to it as well, is that, oh Jesus, I didn't perform as well as I could, and will I ever get back to where I was before? That there's that side of it. Or in a training run, it's just, okay, I was overloading and I just stepped wrong and I caught it and I was just unlucky with it. So there's two sides of it. Now, when you're looking at the mental side of it, I think there's a few different techniques you can use. One that I always use is like a breathing technique. Is like a visualization and a breathing. So if it was like a certain part of the track, if it was or if it was if you were running on trails and it was a certain part of the trail, because you often see this with trail runners, is that you need to start visualizing yourself getting through the trail very comfortable and feeling good.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's that. You can actually use visualization for that. Now, if you start to do that with people, what I'll say to people is then I want you to become aware of your breathing rate as you're doing that. All right. And what they'll notice is at certain points of the trail, their breathing rate will increase because then they start to get more anxious and more worried to see if it's going to kick up or if they're going to get injured again. So their breathing rate naturally increases because it's a stress response. So if you can control your breathing rate in those situations, a lot of the time you can help to take down that response of the body, because there's it's very complex, and I'm trying to make it as simple as possible, but there's loads of different avenues and ways you can go at it. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to turn the nervous system down.
Okay.
In a simple way. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to turn it back so that it doesn't have this overreactive response at a certain point of the track. And just by breathing, that's a really good way of doing it. Like if you want to ramp your nervous system up and make yourself put yourself into a fight or flight state, just breathe really fast. Just breathe like that. Your heart rate will increase. You'll start to get a bit more focused. Everything will increase. But if you do the opposite, you breathe nice and slow, breathing under 8 breaths per minute, really, really slow, long inhales, holding, long exhales and holding, you're going to be put in more of a relaxed state, a less active state. In general, you're going to have less pain with that. You're going to have less tightness, and you're just going to feel way better. Okay, so it's trying to employ that tactic when you are doing a run or when you're visualizing a run. Is like you have to become aware of your breath, because if you're not aware of it and it just takes off by itself, you're going to be in a bit of bother. Now, there's other things you can use as well. Journaling on what your goals are, what you're trying to get back to, what you really want. Are you doing it for yourself? Are you doing it for somebody else? These are all other parts of it as well. And they're huge. You need to really dive into that as well, because a lot of the time with athletes is that they get stuck in a routine of doing something, and they might want to change course slightly. They might want to try out something new, but they feel like they're still attached to that old identity that they need to stay doing what they have been doing in the past. And I struggled with that myself with boxing when I finished the boxing.
No, that is really, really interesting, and that specifically to be the breathing techniques while out on a run, because obviously, before races and whatnot, you do have your coach telling you to, slow, deep breaths to kind of try and, calm yourself down. But then once you do link it to the whole injury and, getting back and recovering, while out on a run, it is, once you say it, you do realise how it can calm you down, and then alternatively bring down your heart rate and reduce your nervous system. So for me personally, that is definitely going to be something that I'm going to employ into my runs and into my training sessions, to hopefully bring down the pain levels and hopefully get back as fit as possible, as quickly as possible. So no, that is really, really helpful. So that is really, it's good to hear, you know what I mean, from someone with your knowledge as well, that there's little things just like breathing that can get you through injuries that have kept you out for so long, that you don't need to focus so much on the physical recovery in the gym, that it's the little things as well that can add on to your recovery.
Yeah, and I should add on to that is that your breathing is a really good way, and your heart rate are great ways of kind of getting an internalized sense of what's going on, getting a better idea of what's going on inside your body. So becoming aware of that in a lot of different situations, maybe before you got to training, when you're warming up with the team or when you're warming up with the lads and you're doing your own bits, kind of just checking in and seeing what it's like at different times, because it could be that you're like, let's say if you are training with guys or girls and you're trying to keep to their pace, even when you're dealing with an Achilles issue, because there is two sides to your injury. That's the thing, is that there's a physical side of it, that it keeps flaring up because maybe you're doing too much or maybe you're not recovering properly between sessions. There's that side to it, but then there's the other side to it, where the nervous system, basically, in its most simple sense, and it's probably something I should have said before when I was talking about pain and how emotions dictate pain, is that the nervous system can get like a burn spot on it. It's the exact same as if you have a burn on your arm.
Okay.
And it's like, basically, if you touch that burn spot, everything gets sore. But if you touch around it, everything's okay. Yeah. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
So that burn spot is the one that keeps flaring up. And when you're controlling your breathing, going through these situations, what you're trying to do is you're trying to reduce the size of that burn spot and reduce the activity of it as well.
Okay, so no, that is that is interesting in a sense for Achilles tendinopathy and Achilles pain specifically, is that, and that is something I found in, being out for so long with Achilles, that it's about as well managing what you can do and when you can do it, because that's what I found with Achilles pain, is that even once the pain reduces, it's still about managing, kind of going around that burn spot, or going around, that threshold of what you can and can't do. And then it's about kind of building back up to kind of, I suppose, reduce that burn as much as possible to get back doing what you were doing beforehand.
Exactly. And if you keep loading it, you're going to get a blister. That's the way I would describe
Deadly.
it.
That is to put it basically in layman's terms, it's a great way to look at it. And kind of down now to dive into Achilles specifically. And I was watching your video on Instagram about Achilles tendinopathy. One point that you did mention was, before you do anything else, was to go to a physio and get a diagnosis to see if it is Achilles tendinopathy. So if you were going to a physio and he was checking out your Achilles, what is he looking for to diagnose it as Achilles tendinopathy?
Yeah, so there's a few different, I suppose, criteria that kind of identify a tendinopathy. Now, some of the main ones are, and that's why I was saying with this one, it's a bit of you have to be careful with the physical and the mental side, which one is actually playing a role. Is that with the tendinopathy, a lot of the time you're going to have pain in the morning, then you're going to have pain before you warm up and during the warm up, and then once you're actually warm, a lot of the time the pain goes away, so you can get through your session.
Yeah.
But then later that evening it comes back, and the next morning it comes back a bit more severe. That's kind of the textbook way of identifying a tendinopathy, is that you have it once you warm up, it goes away. Now, as that progresses, you'll have it, and then you warm up, it'll go away, but it'll come back at the end of a session. And then it progresses even more so to the fact that you just have it all the time. It doesn't ever go away. You just feel it all the time, and it's the next morning it gets sore as well. So there's some of the main ones that you'd be looking at. It's kind of how people describe it. The other thing as well is you can physically see inflammation in the tendon a lot, and and inflammation around the insertion point. You might see that there's a bone spur over that area, that it's gotten bigger, where the Achilles comes into play. But outside of that, then it's really looking at their training regime and what they've been doing. And a lot of the time with tendinopathies, and I say, like, a tendinopathy is one of the easiest ones to kind of look at, because it's so simple in that you're overworking it while it's under recovering.
Okay.
So it's getting stuck in this inflammatory phase all the time. That's what a tendinopathy is. Now, a tendinosis is when you continue to do that and it starts to break down. That's the difference.
Okay.
Now, that's kind of down the line a small bit, but yeah, basically, if someone comes into me, it's talking through their history, when it's happened, when it started. Achilles is pretty simple, because it straight away. Like, you'll know it's an Achilles tendinopathy. But the reason I say you need to go to a physio and get it checked out is there's other things that could come up, in that you have like a grade 1 tear around the soleus, or a grade 1 tear, and you'll see that on different muscle tests that it'll start to come up. That's a big one as well, is that you just need to be careful with that. And then you need to see how much it has progressed, because you obviously know yourself, there is an issue with Achilles, that you can have an Achilles rupture, and just following things, just like picking stuff off social media and saying, I'm going to try this, and I'm going to try this, and I'm going to try this, and then getting an Achilles rupture. That's a completely different. That's an Achilles tendinopathy in a lot of cases that's gone on too far, or it's an Achilles issue that wasn't dealt with in time. That's
kind of a point I wanted to lead into with Achilles tendinopathy, was the fact that, can it get worse in the sense where it can lead into ruptures or tears like that, or is it something that it is manageable in the sense you can the way I was recently kind of looking at it with my specific Achilles pain was in the sense where, like you said, before I warmed up it would hurt. As my injury has gotten better, throughout the warm-up, if I've kind of stretched it beforehand, it won't hurt. Throughout the session, it won't hurt. But then the next morning, initially in my Achilles injury, it would be really tight and quite painful. But kind of now, as time went on, it's not as bad anymore. So I've kind of started looking at it in the sense where maybe it's like my hamstring after I run. Maybe while I warm up and while I'm running, it's grand. But then the next morning, as lactic acid is built up, and kind of just that general stiffness, I've kind of put my Achilles pain as such in that same category. Or is that kind of wrong to do?
Yeah. So, like, I know you are working with a physio at the moment, which is good. So I would definitely take his opinion as well on it. But that's a really, really good sign. I think with a tendinopathy, what a lot of people do is they kind of think about what it's like when they're before training and when they are training. But if I'm looking at a tendinopathy, you need to look at it on a longer scale. It's not something that you fix in 5 days or in 2 weeks. It's something that just takes continuous work over a couple of weeks to a couple of months. And a really easy way to know if it's getting better, if it's getting worse, is see what it's like the next morning. If it's starting to get better the next morning and you only have it for, let's say when it's at its worst, you're feeling it for 2 or 3 days after, that's pretty bad. But now if you start to do your work on it, you start to build up strength, you start to build up tolerance, you take care of the recovery aspect of it as well, because as I said, it's overworked and under recovery.
Yeah.
That's it's both sides to it. And now you're only getting it for 2 days, and then maybe you're only getting it for 1 day, or as you just said there, it's not that much of an issue. You're just feeling it a small bit more with all the other aches and pains that you get after a tough training session. That in general is a good sign that it's improving. In general, that's a good sign that it's moving in the right direction. That's what I would say.
So is that kind of a sign in which it's becoming less of an injury, kind of something? It's less of an injury, kind of something that you just need to manage, in the sense where you can, obviously in terms of getting back from any injury, you have to slowly build it up. But is it kind of a thing where technically once you've kind of recovered it the night before, the same way you may have done your hamstring, and warmed it up the same way maybe you warm up and stretch your hamstrings before running, is it kind of sense where you can technically go back to running and do what you were doing once you have properly warmed up your Achilles at the stage I'm at? Or is it still in a sense where it can rupture or get even worse?
Yeah, so you're always at a stage that it can get rupture, or that it can rupture, or it can get worse. So you need to, for you specifically, what you need to watch out is, you want to, obviously, I would look at your goals, okay? I'd see what you're trying to get back to. If you're trying to get back for, let's say, a certain run that's on in November, well, if it's in November, you've loads of time.
Yeah.
Like, you can start to build up your training. Now, what you're doing is you need to build up your training, progress it at a good rate so that you notice that, okay, right, I can push it on here now a small bit, and then I'm feeling it for 2 days after. Okay, I did too much on that day. So you go back, reassess what you did, maybe knock 10 or 15% off what you did, and then try it again and see how it's feeling. Now, with the other side of things is that because you did put it through that amount of work and you gave it a couple of days recovery, that it'll have adapted. So it should be able to handle a similar load the next time. Okay, now, and you can stop me if I'm going down the wrong avenue with this question, but it's a good indicator then, is kind of progress, see where it kicks up, see where it flares up, pull back a small bit. Okay, maybe you can run a 5K. Are you a short distance, or are you long distance? Okay, what's your distance?
Kind of anything from 15 up all the way to 10K. 1500 all the way to 10K.
Okay. Yeah, okay, perfect. So let's say you can run, for yourself, actually be easier to break it down this way, because you can look at paces as well. So you're able to cover a 5K. I'm just going to use that because it's the midpoint. Comfortably. Okay, let's say you can go through a 5K and you're saying, all right, that's all right, I'm able to get through that, but I was only running at 50%.
Okay.
So you need to have both of those. You need to have the distance and the intensity that you're running at. You can't just say, oh, I ran a 5K, and then the next day one of your mates who's been training for the last 6 months and he's been upping it to get the All Irelands, he's running a 5K in a serious time, and you're saying, all right, I'm going to run with him, and then you do the run and you're saying, oh, I'm back to square one again.
Yeah.
Right. That's because you upped it too fast. You jumped the intensity too fast. Even though the distance was the same, your intensity was increased too fast, or too much. So you need to take care of that. So what I would say is that I'd run your 5K at 50%, see how you're feeling the next day, go through all your recovery stuff, understand that the body takes time to adapt, and then I would try run it at maybe 60%, or you could drop back and you could run a 1500, and you could say, I'm going to run my 1500 here at maybe 60 or 70% and see how it reacts. Okay, so you're always testing distance versus intensity, and then you're reassessing and seeing what it's like the next day.
So it's a lot of trial and error, basically, to kind of see where you're at where you currently are at within your injury, where kind of your pain threshold is, and to see what you can and cannot do until your injury gets better.
Exactly. And but as I said, you need to work in conjunction with a physio for doing this, because there's other factors that play into that as well that you need to take care of. And to go back to actually what we talked about at the start, just to connect it together, as we talked about, if you ran your 5K at 60% and then you ran the next day and you ran a 5K at 70%, but you only slept 6 hours the night before and you have a presentation due, or you have, let's say, exams coming up, well, then what's it going to feel like the next morning?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's why your environment, you really have to take that into account as well. You can't just look at it like with just, okay, right, I've run this distance and I run it at this intensity, I need to increase it.
Yeah.
You have to look at everything else that goes on as well, because as to come back to that point, it's overwork and under recovery or under recovered. That's the problem with tendinopathy.
So with mine specifically at the moment, what mine is so if I was to, because another lad that I do coaching with, he has Achilles tendinopathy in his right Achilles, and we were talking about it, and we do have kind of different experiences with that at the moment, I suppose. So what he was saying with his is well, I'll start with mine because it would make it a little bit easier. So mine would be, if I got out of bed, the pain wouldn't be too bad. Maybe like I'd feel a little bit tight the same way I'd feel another muscle just after running. But if I was to jump out of bed and sprint down the road, both my Achilles would flare up really, really bad. And kind of walking back down to my house, I would find it hard to walk. But if I was to get up out of bed and stretch my Achilles, just do maybe 5 minutes of stretching and activation on my Achilles and sprinted down the road, or even went on a 12k run, I'd have no pain. And once I came back and done my recovery the next morning, maybe a little bit of tightness, but it wouldn't be too bad. In comparison to him, he would have it where he'd wake up and he'd have no pain. Afterwards, though, he would have severe pain. Do you know that way? So that's kind of where our two differences were. So in terms of me specifically, kind of I'm at that stage where once I'm completely warmed up and ready to run, I'm expecting, as of lately with the way my Achilles pain has been going, I'm expecting 0 to 1 levels of pain. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. So that 0 to 1 level, like pain level, is very good. Like if you were saying that you haven't, like how long, what was it at its worst?
How long was that at its worst? So let me think. So I started off, it would start off where I'd be kind of at the same way, in the sense where if I hadn't stretched it out, and I would, if I just done my warm up early on in the Achilles pain, so I done a 15-minute jog before a training session, it'd be fine. Once I done a stride down the track before getting going, that's when the pain would get really, really bad. So I suppose when I put a lot of force into it, it would get really, really bad. I kind of overlooked it for a while. And then it got to a stage where even if I was just jogging down the road, it would flare up really, really painfully. So kind of, I'd say maybe 2 months after I got the initial pain, it kind of was at its worst, in the sense where it was really, really tight in the morning, really, really sore if I jogged during the day, and still really sore at night. So I'd say maybe 2 months in, it was at its worst, and it's been about 1.5 years now.
Okay, but it has improved a lot. Are you back training fully?
So I'm back doing about 3 days a week. Because I also had inner knee pain as well. It all kind of came as one, and it was a point I kind of wanted to touch on as well, because I was talking with physios and coaches and stuff, and I was growing at the same time. So
that's the point.
So kind of just real quick, I wanted to get your opinion on that with groin pains in running, because I've gotten mixed opinions on groin pains. I've got physios telling me they don't exist, other physios telling me they do exist, but they stem from other areas. So I kind of want to get your opinion on the whole, stigma behind groin pains.
Yeah, see, groin pains is an interesting one. Now, I'm only about 5'7", so I never had groin pains too much. But they're an interesting one in that everyone gets them at different times, or not everyone gets them, but different people experience them at different times. And there's other conditions that come along with that. I'm sure you've probably heard of Osgood-Schlatter's disease. It's a big one. Runners get it, basketball players get it. It's on the front of your knee, down, I suppose, below your knee. But you'll often get it if you get a growing spurt and then you continue to train at the same level. I believe that I think it comes back to like what we were talking about pain earlier on. What else is going on at the same time? Just growing pains by themselves, it can, like, first, I know some people who were able to train consistently 4 or 5 days a week from when they were, let's say, 14, 15 years old up to 21, and they were still, obviously they went through growing spurts and they had no issues. But I know other people who didn't even grow that much, like that may have grown 2 inches over summer or 3 inches over summer, or over more than a summer, probably 5 or 6 months, but they got a lot more severe, So when you're looking at growing pains, it's an interesting one, because your body is very good. It's very, very, very well able to adapt, and it can adapt to nearly any stress you put on it, if you put a small bit of stress on it and you give it a chance to recover. And it was a really interesting study they did in the 1960s with rats. And what they did is they basically gave them cyanide, which is a poison, in small doses, but they slowly but surely increased the dose over the space of a couple of weeks. And then at the end, they gave them a huge dose, one that would kill good size rat or most humans. And they found that the rats were able to live after it. Basically, they were able to survive because they had built up a tolerance to the doses underneath that. So the reason I bring that up is the body's very, very, very good at adapting once it's given enough time to recover. So if you're getting growing pains, is it that you are not recovering properly in between sessions? Do you know, are you training too much and then not recovering properly? And then people are saying, oh, it's growing pains when it could be other issues. Or that's the way I would look at it. What else is contributing to your pain levels at that time? That's the biggest thing. If you can get a good idea what it is, and all the stuff that we talked about before is huge. The other thing with teenagers is between 16 and 19, or even later than that, is that their sleep is all over the place.
Yeah.
In general, it's not consistent. It's up and down, and they're getting 5 hours a night. They're sitting up all night on their phones, or they're doing other things. Like we all did it. Like, so I think that's a big one, is that if you're not keeping an eye on sleep, like I've seen people give up sport because their sleep and not know that it was their sleep that was contributing to their pain.
Okay.
That they were only sleeping 4 hours a night, 4.5 hours a night, and they had no energy. They were getting injured all the time, and they were getting really, really high pain with stuff. But when you pare it all back and you look at it, it's like you were only sleeping 4.5 hours a night for a couple of months at a time. So if that's the case, your pain is going to be really high if you do anything. Like, have a bad night's sleep and then just stub your toe on something. It's going to be really severe. It's going to be a lot more severe. So it's an interesting question, and hopefully I didn't go too all over the place with it, but it comes back to what else is going on at the time, is what I would say. In that, when you look at growing pains, is that like you have to check everything else out. What's your sleep like? How's your diet? Are you overtraining? Are you doing too much variety in your, or not too much variety in your training? Are you focused on one thing too much? Are you increasing the intensity too much? There's a load of other factors there as well that could contribute to the issues that you were feeling in your knees and in the Achilles.
Okay. Yeah, that is like we mentioned, there's obviously a lot of factors that lead to injuries and are reasons why you feel pain at different times. In terms of the case, so kind of when I was with I've gone through 3 physios now over the last year and a half, and the first one was saying, the first physio I had was saying that specifically about growing pains with the Achilles, was that maybe bones might be growing faster than tendons or ligaments, and obviously the Achilles tendon itself might be getting stretched, making it tender because it's trying to catch up with the bone, or it's getting stretched because other things are growing quicker. Is that something that can happen that can lead to Achilles pain or Achilles tendinopathy?
That's very niche now. It's very specific, but can that happen? I would say that it could, but the way I would look at it would be that you're growing, like usually the muscles and the tendon should, like Osgood-Schlatter's disease, the one that I mentioned before, is generally when the bone grows too fast and the tendon doesn't get a chance. But at the same time, you nearly always see that. You rarely see that in people that are not athletes. You'll mostly see it in people that are training. And why is that? It's because they're stressing it at the same time that it's growing. So are they just over stressing it for what's going on?
Okay.
Like, are they just, that's why I'm like, I don't want to just give you an answer and just say yes or no. Is that you have to look at all the other factors. Is that, okay, the bone is getting longer, the tendon should be reforming at a similar rate, maybe not at the exact same rate, but at a similar rate. But while the tendon is reforming, are you overstressing the tendon and then trying to get it to adapt to a certain training stimulus when it hasn't fully adapted to the growing stimulus?
That's kind of the kind of not the answer I was looking for, but that was kind of the area in which I was thinking. When people basically tell me or ask me kind of why are your Achilles hurting, the one thing that I tell them is, this kind of what I've grasped over kind of the times I've spent with physios over the course of my injuries. The thing that, like, while I was, like, when I initially got injured, I was 5'4" and 45 kg. Do you know what I mean? That's when I started growing, and I was running 70-80k a week. So
that's a lot, like.
So that's, I think, then once I start growing and I was continuing 70-80k a week, I was putting a lot of pressure on my Achilles specifically, while it was growing, maybe while it was getting stretched, making it really tender, and it was probably really, really weak. And then once it started flaring up, it just decided to go. And it
Yeah.
wasn't until now I'm 5'10", 62 kg. So, and that's over a year and a half span. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
So
that's
it's,
quick.
yeah, exactly. And on top of that, running initially 70, 80k a week. So kind of that's the base premise that I give people when they're kind of asking me where the injury stemmed from. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And the thing is then as well, with that and with that massive increase in growth is you really have to look at all those like how have you been sleeping
Y-
over that
yeah,
time, over that last year and a half. It is a time of your life there that you're going 17, 18, you're getting a bit more what would you say, independence with things. So you have a bit more structure on what you can do yourself, or even a bit less structure, I mean, in what you're doing. So you can kind of do whatever you want, a small bit more, obviously within
yeah,
reason. So that's another factor as well, is that things change as well, and you're keeping the same running, you're still running your 70, 80k a week, but your body's changing and you're not really giving it a chance to recover. In that situation, if I was looking back at it and it was you and you were putting yourself back there again, what you would probably have to do is you'd probably have to have more high days and more low days. So it's like if you were running, you'd probably have to structure a lot more you're running on, like let's say on Monday,
yeah.
and then take the Tuesday, Wednesday off, and then see how you are on Thursday to run a bit more. That's the way I'd look at it. Is you may need to just kind of switch it a small bit so you're getting a bit more recovery in between runs and in between sessions.
And kind of with the video I watched on your Instagram about Achilles tendinopathy, was one of the points you mentioned was to not shut down training straight away, which is
Yeah.
something that because initially I stopped because of my knees, but then once my knees completely got bad, my Achilles got even worse. But I think that kind of stems back a little bit to what we were saying about, my nervous system was alert because of my knees, so everything else kind of came to the forefront that was, initially giving me bother or affecting me. But then
Yeah.
now that I've gotten, significantly better, the level of, the way my Achilles have been bothering me lately, like I mentioned to you, what do you think I'm, at a point where I can start maybe ramping up the training just a little bit more because my Achilles have come on so much?
Yeah, see, it is a difficult one, and this is the case with doing podcasts and doing stuff online as well. Is that like I don't know your full background. I know what you've told me now, so I don't have a kind of a full view of your
Yeah,
background, even when it goes to like your beliefs and attitudes and all that. I don't have an idea of that. So like I'd have to sit down with you for like an hour and go through it and go in detail on, like, let's say, with a bit more structure and how I would look at it. But in a general sense, once your physio says that you're good to start increasing it, and it could be that you are like, if you, what's your next competition? Like, what are you aiming to train for at the moment, or is there anything?
yeah. So my aim at the moment is mid-October, the first round of the Dublin Cross Country Championships.
Okay, okay, perfect. Okay, so you've the middle of October, and it's the 1st of September now. I don't know when this podcast is coming out, but it's the 1st September now. Um, but so what I would say for you is you could probably test it, and like if you were a client of mine, I would say I need you to figure out what your limit is. I need you to figure out how far you can go before this thing flares up. So we have at least a gauge of how far we can push and how much we can push on it. So if it, as I said earlier on, if that means you can run 5k at 60%, okay, perfect. That's what we can work around.
Yeah,
So now we know what we can do. But just without testing it and without finding your limit, it's a small bit more difficult to manage it, because then you don't know when you can push it, how to push it, how much you're able to push it on, what you need to change around it. Is it that you need to do more like short speed work, or is it that you can do longer distance? Because if it's cross country, it's 5k, is it? It's cross country.
this year I think it is 8k.
Oh, does it
Yeah,
change?
yeah.
Yeah.
As you go up, kind of up the age groups, the distance gets further and further.
Okay. Okay. Well, you'll know, all right. For a simple thing is you'll need to be able to run 8k standard. That's going to be a thing for
Yeah,
you. And I'm not talking about 8k on a trail yet. I'm just talking about 8k just on like a track or on a road or
okay.
whatever. And then you need to figure out, all right, I'm able to run 8k on a road here. I can do it comfortably. Now you need to start moving over to trails, and you need to start seeing how you are on trails, or in a cross country is usually run through a field, isn't
Yeah,
it? More so than a
yeah,
trail,
kind of
yeah.
on the grass.
So it's a small bit more unpredictable. But yeah, then you need to test it on that and see how it reacts on that, because that's a completely different thing than running an 8k on a track. running an AK on a track and running an AK on a trail or cross country through a field is a completely different stimulus on the body. One's very controlled in that you know where you're stepping and you know everything that's going on around you.
Yep.
There's no hills. While on as you know yourself, on cross country, you're going up and down, over and
Yeah.
back. You're avoiding holes. You're doing all that. So I would test it first and see how it is on each of those surfaces. See what distance you're able to cover without getting many problems, and then I would look to build it up then over time. Once you have a better idea of what your limit is and what you can do, and then obviously the goal is to get to 8K cross country running. If you could do that before the race, like if you were able to get that before the race, that would be huge. But as I said, it's very individual, and it'd be something that you have to check in, week out. If I were you, I would I would get a training diary out and I would just write it down.
Okay.
What you covered, what intensity you ran at, or what pace. See, with running, it's a lot easier because you can put paces on it. While football, you can time it. Well, like Gaelic football and stuff like that, you can't do that as much. And you'll know then, okay, right, I ran this in this time. So, and you can rate the pain. What I say is, rate it before, rate it after, and rate it the next morning, and then the day after that. Okay. So have four points for that, and then you can measure it off and bring that into your physio, and you can say, right, I did this, this, and this, and this, and then he'll be able to tell you, okay, well, like you can increase it this much, or you can pull it back this much. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. So it's to find out your goal and be able to achieve everything and trial everything before the event or the race comes up, through trial and error, seeing what you can do, when you can do it, how much of it you can do, at what intensity. And then if you can't by the time the race comes along, so be it. But it is about trial and error and progressing through the distances and through the intensities.
That's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly it. And then doing your rehab outside of that as well.
Exactly.
Still getting through your rehab in the gym and getting your gym work done, and then and obviously taking care of your sleep and taking care of your hydration and stuff like that. If you're going to be going into college now, like September is going to be a busy month for you.
Yeah.
Even though you think it's going to be a straight line, so you have to take that into account as well.
Definitely. No, and no, it's been really, really like a lot of. I know, like I have a sheet full of notes here that I wanted to get through for the podcast. We only got onto achillies tendonopathy, which is deadly. I could sit here for another 2 hours talking to you, but I know you're a very busy man, so we might have to jump on for episode 2 of the podcast.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be good. Because I do have to head out in a couple of minutes. So, hopefully I covered enough. Is there anything that you want to do quick fire, pretty quick there, and I could stay for another 2 minutes if you want to.
Let's have a quick look. I had a look at one of your videos again on Instagram about 3 mobility myths. So if I just jump into one of them really quickly. Or you know what, I actually want to jump into about icing in injuries, if you want to just give a quick few points about that, because I know lately there's been a lot of change of heart for a lot of physiotherapists, even the one that I'm working with now, saying it's not the most effective way with injuries. Can you just kind of give us a baseline of why that might be and why people have had a change of heart recently about icing injuries?
Yeah, well, first off, the physio that you're working with sounds good. Sounds like they're up to date on the stuff that they're doing. Basically, the icing protocol came out. It was a RICE protocol: rest, ice, compress, and elevate. Came out in like the 70s, early 80s. Now, they really pushed it because they found that it reduced inflammation straight away. In that, in the short term, it was able to reduce the amount of swelling that you had around the area and inflammation. But then what they were finding is, because of that, your body obviously has that there for a reason. But what was happening then is it was delaying the response, so the healing response. So when you get an injury, your body sends certain markers that pick points of where the injury is, and they say, okay, this needs healing. This is obviously child's say now a way of putting it, but or layman's way of putting it. But yeah, it picks points and says, right, this needs to be healed, this needs to be worked on, it needs to be improved. But when you're icing it, what happens is it closes off all the blood vessels, and then those markers don't get to the point, so it delays the response to that. So even though you're not getting as much swelling in a physical aspect, or from a subjective perspective where you're looking at it, it looks okay, that must be getting better. But from an object of an actual healing response, the healing response is delayed. So it's not getting the nutrition, it's not getting the circulation that it needs to start the healing process faster.
And kind of maybe something that could substitute icing, that could maybe give you that like little bit of a quick relief, at the same time allowing you to send those, I suppose, nutrients and good stuff to the spot that needs healing. What's a little substitute that someone could do?
Yeah, so it's this is something that I dive into, and I have my own podcast that I kind of jump into these a good bit. It's Mobility Experiment if anyone is looking for it, because I go in, I spend a bit more time on each of these individually. But basically, if there's something else that you are looking to do, I think movement is completely underused. Like, and that's it obviously depends on the injury that you get, but they're finding now in nearly any injury, even in fractures, that like a lot of fractures they put them in a cast for 6 weeks. Now they're actually just looking at putting it in 4 weeks and then mobilizing it after 4 weeks, because they find it improves the healing rate and improves function after. So I think light movements are a great way to start. I myself pulled a hamstring about 2.5 weeks ago, training, and I straight away from that day I was doing very, very, very light leg, like light movements, and trying to build it up then, to the point that I was able to start running about 3 or 4 days after it, because I knew what I was doing and I kind of had built it up. The same thing with any of those is that, even though, like, don't worry too much about swelling, I would say worry more about function,
Okay.
and think about how you can get it moving. And if you get it moving, that'll bring circulation as well as your lymphatic system, which is the thing that gets rid of swelling. That will take it all away.
Deadly. No, that is that's really good to hear, because I know icing is still some people that maybe aren't as up to date as like you and other physios out there, that it's something that they go to straight away, and when they get injured, and that rice treatment that you mentioned is something that people are still employing. So it is
Yeah.
good to hear from someone like yourself that it isn't. Not even that's not the best thing to do. It's maybe something that you should completely avoid and substitute it with light movement, to kind of allow the nutrients to get to where they need to go, as well as being able to recover properly. So that is really, really good to hear. I still have so many points that we could get through here, Robbie, but we will definitely jump on the podcast for a part two. I know, like I said, you're a very, very busy man, so I will let you go, but I do really appreciate you jumping on the podcast and having a chat.
No, thanks a million for having me. And I was going to actually say and finish on that last point, was that the guy who invented the rice protocol went back on it. He was the one who found out that it was wrong.
I
So
think my physio might have been following you on Instagram, because word for word this is exactly what he's been saying.
yeah.
So yeah, I think he think it might have been following you, but no, once the word's getting around, that's the main thing.
Exactly. But yeah, come here. Thanks a million for having me on the podcast. Yeah, sorry, now I couldn't stay longer. I do have to jump off. But I really, really appreciate having me on it and reaching out. And I know it was a couple of times that we had to reschedule it, so I apologize
No
for
problem at
that.
all.
And yeah, whenever you want to do a second one, we can definitely get that
Deadly,
organized.
fingers crossed in the near future we can organise that. But like I said, really appreciate it. Very, very helpful. Like I mentioned, few points are a little bit selfish, but I'm sure there's people listening at home that have gotten a lot out of it as well. So that's always beneficial when jumping on the podcast, and hopefully we'll have you for the part two soon enough.
That's it exactly. That's it exactly. Yeah. Hopefully, I'm sure people will be able to take something from it, because tendinopathies, you can kind of apply the same principles to most of them.
Exactly. And for everyone watching and listening at home, I really hope you enjoyed, and I appreciate you listening, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.